Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hi everyone, I'm Bryce Duskett, and I'd like to thank you for joining us here on Market Journal. Coming up on today's program, we'll discuss how cleaning your combine can help with weed suppression. Certainly a timely topic as harvest is full steam ahead across the Cornhusker state. We'll also check on weather with Al Dutcher and get a look at the markets. But first, we're going to take you back to the site of last week's Husker Harvest Days, where we got some insights into the current issues that are facing producers as they get ready to get into those fields for harvest. While there's always a lot to see at the grounds of Husker Harvest Days, there's also a lot to learn. We're able to catch up with Golden Harvest agronomist Luke Curl, who had some thoughts to share with us when it comes to planning for variability as producers hit those fields for harvest.
So scouting is going to be crucial this fall. We've got a lot of things going on this year because of the drought. Early season we had colder soil temps, so we didn't get an early start to the year. We also has been super dry, and so we haven't had great root development all year long. So scouting now this fall is going to be really, really crucial. Monitoring your milk line to black layer, and things are going to dry down a lot faster this harvest as compared to before. So timing, be checking moisture, things are going to change quickly. So and be ready to roll into the next field and get that field picked.
After visiting with the good folks over at Golden Harvest, we were able to catch up with some of the friendly faces over at the Farmers Business Network location. FBN Regional Director for the West Central Region is Ian Lohr. He informed us that supply chain issues are still a real concern for producers headed into the harvest season.
Supply chains are definitely one of the top things that I hear growers concerned about. I've been at a number of seed plots and grower meetings over the last few weeks, and that's definitely a recurring theme. I would say they're better. Things have improved over the last several months. We've seen shipment times starting to come down both across ocean freight and land freight, but there's definitely going to be headaches going into 2023 as well. I wouldn't say we're in the clear yet.
As supply chains are still a bit uncertain at best these days, FBN Chief Economist Kevin McNews says that marketing commodities will be a real balancing act for producers this year and headed into that 2023 planting season.
Yeah, I think we're in this for a long haul. I don't think this is going to correct quickly. The supply chain issues are still a problem, although they are improving, and certainly on the chem price side of things, we're seeing some back down from where they were in the spring. But I don't think we're going to go back to, say, a year ago levels on the chem side or on the fertilizer side. And so I think, not only fertilizer inputs, chem inputs, but also land values are through the roof as well. So everything's kind of in play to keep prices inflated, but I also think we're going to see commodity markets stay inflated as well. So it's going to be a balancing act for farmers as they try to grapple with rising costs and sell prices that hopefully make profits for them.
Some good thoughts and perspectives there from Husker Harvest Days. Now, over the coming weeks, we'll continue to share some stories and segments from this year's show. Moving on now, for those who keep an eye on ag policy, an important piece of legislation is set to expire in year 2023. The 2018 Farm Bill will expire in September of next year, and Congress will have to act to continue funding the many programs that farmers are familiar with. While we were out at Husker Harvest Days, we were able to catch up with Ag Policy Extension Educator Brad Lubben to get his thoughts on what is setting the stage for the next Farm Bill. We're visiting now with Brad Lubben. When it comes to ag policy, of course, Brad's the one we like to bring in. We're going to talk about the Farm Bill. Brad, it seems like the conversations were just kind of winding down, but we're back talking about it again because we've got a deadline coming up in September of 2023, if I understand right. Share the details of that.
You bet. The 2018 Farm Bill was authorized for 5 years. It runs through September 2023. It covers the 2023 crop, but then we're going to be talking about the need for new Farm Bill legislation to work from, generally speaking, from 2024 on. If it expires in 2023 and we don't get a Farm Bill debate done, then we bring up the sort of eternal discussion of, but what about permanent legislation from 1949? That we never get around to actually implementing that. but it forces the discussion, and we expect the discussion to happen over the next year.
Well, let me ask you about that. We do have, the Farm Bill, we kind of tweak things and reauthorize. Why isn't there, legislation put in place indefinitely?
The 1949 Farm Bill, we called it permanent legislation. That was the last Farm Bill that did not have an expiration date in it. Every Farm Bill since simply supersedes it, but expires, and it forces that debate on a regular basis. And generally speaking, the debate is always focused on what should we extend, what should we bring up new, what should we reform. So there's always been an argument about trying to make changes as we go. Now, more recently, we had the 2014 Farm Bill. The 2018 Farm Bill was very much status quo. We could have a Farm Bill debate in 2023 that just builds on the status quo as far as farm programs that we know. So it's not permanent, but it's getting long term.
Seems like the commodity groups have come out with some of their priorities already as we gear up for that conversation. When it comes to setting the Farm Bill, I'm sure the current dynamic of the ag economy factors largely into that. What are you expecting when it comes to setting the stage?
The ag economy has benefited from strong prices. The post-COVID sort of commodity rally, supply concerns across the globe have given us a very strong commodity market. Those higher prices still come with a great deal of volatility, and they're that much higher than where the safety net is. So instead of having the safety net there to help us on the downside, now we've got all this volatility and the safety net's too far below us. That's led to a lot of producers talking about, can we increase the safety net to catch the downside now? Or can we focus on the fact that, prices are higher, but so are production costs, and the profit margins or the return over cost is still narrow, still shrinking, outlook's a little more concerning. Can we manage that margin maybe more effectively than we just manage price or yield? Those are the kinds of proposals that come forward. They all come with costs. So if you want that kind of increase in a safety net, how do you pay for it? It's a good question.
Seems like the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the messaging, a lot of the things I've seen have to do with climate smart practices. Do you expect that to take a big shape?
From the administration, we've seen that as a high priority. From the leadership, the current leadership of the ag committees in Congress, we've seen that as a priority. We have rolled out through the so-named Inflation Reduction Act here of 2022, we've rolled out $20 billion of new conservation program spending. That'll come out through the existing conservation programs that we know, but it's focused on climate practices. That adds into a budget debate that's rather interesting. Do we have new money for a bill? Are we forced to talk about a potential budget cutting bill? Or how do we even talk about budget when we've been spending billions and billions on climate? We've spent billions on ad hoc relief. We've spent billions on broadband. We have spent authorized billions for renewables and bioenergy incentives. There's an awful big budget debate that sort of dwarfs the traditional farm bill, and sorting that out for the next debate is going to be rather interesting.
Adding to all of that are the political dynamics of who's in control of the Senate, who's in control of the House. How's that going to play into the conversations?
You're right. The control of the Senate and the House, and thus the control of leadership of the ag committees, really will impact the kind of debate that we have on the next farm bill, presuming that it starts in early 2023 as most expect. The current priorities of climate and equity and food assistance under Democratic leadership and a Democratic administration may look very different if Republicans take one or both houses in Congress. The farm policy priorities, other priorities look different from one party to the next, and that helps drive the debate. That doesn't mean that we'll ignore those things one way or the other, but it's certainly a different kind of debate based on who's in leadership.
So let's lay out the timeline quickly of when we could possibly see a new farm bill passed. You said talking in early 2023, expires September. What happens from there?
Well, let's just think about this year itself. I've actually been somewhat surprised earlier this year that we didn't start talking a little more earnestly about a farm bill debate, in part because Democrats control Congress and the White House, obviously, at the moment. The opportunity to push something now, if they desired, is as good as it's going to get. So the fact that we haven't even started talking about it suggests that everybody has alluded to the fact that it'll probably start in early 2023, subject to whoever is in leadership in Congress at the time. If it's a switch in leadership we're probably likely to restart some additional hearings before we get into formal markup and committee deliberations. All of that, though, could lead to a process that gets us to a new farm bill by September 2023, if it all happens on time. Most farm bills don't happen on time. So there's still a very strong likelihood that we get the discussion started, but maybe we don't get done and it lingers through late 2023, or even sort of the fail-safe is, no, we don't actually revert to 1949. That's really not in the feasible set, but we can't figure out the new bill, so we end up punting and passing 1 year or more extension of present policy, and we'll live with it and move on for another year.
We'll keep an eye on it. Brad, appreciate your time.
Thank you, Bryce.
If you would like more insights from Brad on the upcoming Farm Bill, we provided a couple of links to his latest articles on this subject, along with this interview, which can be found now on the Market Journal website. Turning our attention over to the grain markets now, we were joined on Wednesday afternoon by Heartland Farm Partners President Jeff Peterson to discuss some of the trends and factors influencing the commodity trade. You've been a traveler lately. How are things looking in terms of yield across the territories you've traveled? I believe you're up in North Dakota a week or two ago.
Yeah, was up there for the Big Iron farm show that they had up there, and a great turnout. It was fun to get a chance to get up there. Starting off up in North Dakota, it's interesting. They started off really wet early, and unfortunately here towards the end they've turned off dry, and so they just aren't quite getting the finish that they like. And then as you move a little further down into South Dakota, that southeast corner, just as Pro Farmer talked about, it's definitely dry, yields are going to be off. But as you move your way north up into South Dakota, at that point the crops look like they're going to be a little better, but it's so variable, just like we're seeing here in Nebraska. Some guys are saying they're going to be off 35-40% on their yield compared to last year. Other guys that they'd say they're going to be about steady. So it's really interesting to talk to people right now, Bryce.
Well, with that in mind, Jeff, let's talk about nationally, as we like to do as we look at corn and soybean crops. What do you think happens with yield as we assess those post-harvest?
I really appreciated getting NASS out in the field and having their numbers available for the WASDE report. It's a little bigger sampling than what Pro Farmer had. It was good to see Pro Farmer's numbers, but as we dig into that, so as we started looking at their basically their number of ears and coming up with those implied ear weights, we think they're pretty close on the corn number. It could maybe come down about a half a bushel yet. Now, if we get in there and ultimately we see that for some reason the kernel depth isn't quite there, it's a chance it could come down 2 bushels yet, but it's getting close. As we dig over to the bean number, though, that's the one that surprised us. They came out with that 50.5. We didn't think in this report there'd be enough information, but what it tells us is, as we dug in to look at those pod counts, 1604 on the pod count would be the smallest amount of pods that NASS was reported going back to 2019. And when we put that 50.5 yield on that brings us up to a pod weight that would be a new record for September, and if it holds, would be a new record overall. And I don't know about you, Bryce, but I just don't think we've had the weather to give us those type of pod weights. We got surprised back in 2012, because in 2012, late in the season, there was some rains came in mainly because of a hurricane that came into the Gulf that gave the eastern corn belt some rains, and even over into Iowa some rain. And as a result of that did give us some higher pod weights than normal, but I don't think it's this type of year. So we're looking for the soybean yield to also come down. Too early to say how much, but I think it'll come down from where it's at yet, Bryce.
Knowing that, Jeff, let me ask you this. End of September historically is not always the best time to sell your commodities. That's not the market's high year as we look at the previous data. With that in mind, where do you think we're going with prices for corn and soybeans?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. Normally this time of year, we're on a process of going lower into harvest, but there's so much uncertainty out there on the supply side yet, not only within the U.S., but also across, over into Ukraine and looking at what type of start Brazil's getting off to. Overall, we think that once we can kind of maybe get away from a little bit of the hedge pressure that could happen because of harvest, we think we've got some higher prices on the future side down the road on both the corn and the bean side. Now, what that's going to take, though, okay, this is no layup. On the bean side, stocks and ending use, it's tight, and if the bean tightens up, then it probably has a little bit easier time. But what we have to remember is that Brazil, they're planning. And if they end up having a big crop, ultimately then that could be a little bit short-lived, and on a rally we'll have to take advantage of that. Over on the corn side, though, in order for us to support the numbers we're at and ultimately a little bit higher prices, which we think is possible, we are going to have to see that yield come down slightly.
Jeff, let me give you this scenario. Harvest is underway across the Cornhusker State, as we mentioned here on the broadcast a couple of times. Bins are full for a producer. They still have corn or soybeans out in the field. What should they do with those that are unsold?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one this time of year everybody needs to kind of think about. So we start to answer that question by saying, okay, where are you sold? What percent sold are you? You know, we'd like to be right now about 70% sold of insured bushels. That's what we've worked our way up to. Still got quite a few bushels to sell, but if you haven't sold anything yet, you should take advantage of this rally in here and make some sales. But if you're, you know, somewhere around that 70% of insured, which would be about half of production, you can probably just go ahead and hold off at this point. Those bushels that do go into town, we would say, I would put those on delayed pricing. That's going to be a little bit cheaper than what we have on the storage side. The reason we're going the delayed pricing route there is that we still think there'll be some opportunities to see a better basis number down the road. So what you can do is you can go delayed pricing. We see some basis improvement happen after we get past harvest. At some point in there, you can convert that over to a basis contract, which would stop your delayed pricing charges, also allow you then to pick up in a cash advance on those bushels, still gives you the ability to get a better futures price. And then at that point down the road, then when we think the futures is kind of topped out, we can then go ahead and price out that basis contract.
Let me pull something you just said there. You said you expect basis to get stronger. People say basis is strong right now. You're predicting it to be even stronger here in the months ahead?
Yeah, that's a good pickup. I'm glad you asked that question because what we have to kind of break it down. So let's make it so that we make sure we're clear. So the basis levels that you have for what I'll call these quick ship bushels, the stuff that's going to go the next day or the next week, are really good numbers. And you need to take advantage of those if you've got some bushels. Maybe you sold some stuff and you're on a hedge to arrive. You can take advantage of that basis level, get that locked up. But for the stuff that I call that gut slot, that stuff's going to come in right during harvest, we still think we could see just a little bit better basis level there yet. We want to wait and see and make sure these rains don't end up materializing and being more than what we think. Slow harvest up, wait just a little bit on that harvest basis, but you will want to get that locked in for bushels that physically have to go to town that are on a hedge to arrive. But basically then after harvest, yeah, we do think we'll see some basis improvement happen, Bryce.
Final word. As typical years, I ask for advice. You've been doling out all sorts of advice, though, here, Jeff, so I'll just leave you with your final word. What would you like to leave us with this week?
The biggest thing right now is get out in the fields, get an idea where your yields are at, understand what you're going to have to physically move for bushels, take some time to go ahead and understand what your cash flow is, and be ready to make some sales on a rally in the market.
We appreciate Jeff's time, as always, for joining us here on the program. Next week, we'll be joined by Doug Simon from Trade-Offs. If you have a question you'd like for me to ask Doug, feel free to email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll be sure to pass those questions along. Well, it is now time for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Well, Al, it was hot to start the week. I believe I saw 102 degrees here in the capital city, but had a quick cool down toward the middle of the week. How do things look as we look to the week ahead when it comes to harvest?
Well, Bryce, we had very warm conditions early in the week. A lot of 100-degree readings across southern Nebraska, and in Lincoln we had two multiple days back-to-back of 100-degree readings, and we peaked out at 103. So that's our second latest that we've seen consecutive 100-degree days. Thankfully, if we look into the future, this should be the last of the heat. We're just getting into the season where it's going to be impossible, very hard to get that 100-degree temperatures unless we have very dry surface conditions. And we're starting to see a slight uptick in precipitation from troughs coming in the western United States. We're seeing more and more of the state getting closer to normal for the month of September, although there is going to be some areas that are going to be below normal, particularly in the eastern part of the state. But we've seen some respectable moisture starting to appear in portions of central, south central, and southwest Nebraska from previous storms and this latest event that just moved through the state. So as we look at the upper air models as we go through this next week, the first thing I'll draw your attention to is that storm system that brought the precipitation this week is now basically up in northern Minnesota, will move to the Great Lakes and intensify. So we'll see some renewed cooling as the cold front itself pushes through the state. Nothing in the way of any significant moisture. That should remain to our north and our northeast. So as we go into tomorrow, we'll see that ridge starts to build to the west. The trough deepens over the Great Lakes. That brings in a northwest and northerly flow in eastern Nebraska from the jet stream, and that will keep our conditions, our temperatures basically locked in the upper 60s across the northeast to around the mid 70s across the south portions of the state. As we go into the day on Sunday, we'll see that ridge building up a little bit farther The trough itself digs a little bit deeper, so we're going to be pretty consistent in temperature across eastern Nebraska, slightly warmer across western Nebraska, but nothing in the way of any significant moisture. Now, as we go into the day on Monday, we will see a little trough that is starting to get itself going out in portions of Wyoming, and that is expected to start to move toward the east. And the discrepancies in the models the last couple of days has been that either this trough quickly moves east or it digs deeper. So if this thing moves east, we're going to see temperatures that are going to be pretty consistent, back in the 70s, possibly warming up a little bit in western Nebraska up toward the 80 to 85 degree range in the southwestern part of the state especially. And as we go into the day on Wednesday, we see that energy from today's model showing it sliding across southern Nebraska, so we may see a little bit of light precipitation. If this trough again intensifies, then we'll see a little bit more widespread precipitation. And here is Hurricane Hermine. And the models are all over the place with this. So if this does come up to the northwest, we're going to see a little bit more moisture in the western Gulf. And if this takes the present anticipated course, then it's going to come into Louisiana to the Florida Panhandle. So this has a lot of bearing on what will happen later next week. Now, as we go into the day on Thursday, we're going to see the trough itself move to the east, flatten out this ridge. Fairly benign temperatures, probably looking a little bit warmer than what we've seen early in the week, but we'll be basically in the upper 70s to low 80s. No significant push of cold air. And as we go into late next week, the hurricane starts to make its approach toward Louisiana. It could move west or it could move east, so pay attention. There's going to be a lot of interest in this system as it comes into the Gulf of Mexico. And more importantly, we start to see a trough developing in the western United States, and the question is whether this will come out like it did this last time, up toward the north, or we will see a progression toward the east. So we don't have an 8 to 14-day forecast simply because there's so many uncertainties with these systems. Again, it could be warmer than normal or it could be cooler than normal depending on how this trough and this hurricane interact with the atmosphere, but overall looks like some decent weather, at least next week, for harvest activity.
Thank you, Al. Finally today, as more and more combines hit the field for harvest, it might be a good idea to check certain parts of your combine to ensure you're not spreading seeds from invasive weeds from one field to the other. Market Journal's Bill Dodd brings us some good advice from this year's Soybean Management Field Days.
It's time once again for producers to get the combines out in the fields. However, for producers dealing with weeds such as Palmer amaranth and water hemp on their operation, it would be a good idea to clean out certain areas of your combine in the middle of harvesting a field or before moving to another. Daniel Smith is the Southwest Regional Agronomist for the University of Wisconsin, and he spent several days during Nebraska Extension's Soybean Management Field Days giving Nebraska producers some insight into how they can limit the spread of weeds in their fields by making sure that they clean out their combines as they move throughout the process of harvest.
So the combine does an excellent job of harvesting our Palmer amaranth and water hemp seeds. 99% of those seeds are retained until harvest, and the combine mechanically separates those from the plant and spread those out. However, a lot of those seeds that don't get blown through the combine get hung up on the head, the feeder house, the rock trap, the rotor, and stick around and then get redeposited out throughout the next field. So we want to try and minimize the spread of those weed seeds by doing a combine clean out maybe between weedy fields, or maybe even within the field. If there's one weedy patch in that entire large field, it might pay to just stop, clean out those weed seeds, prevent them from causing future problems.
When it comes to cleaning out the combine, there are a few specific areas you should focus on. Taking the time to accomplish these tasks will pale in comparison to dealing with the weeds that could sprout after the seeds have been spread around your fields. Within about 30 minutes, you could greatly reduce the need to spray for these weeds during the following growing season, cutting down on both labor and input costs. However, you should consider a few safety aspects before you get started.
So a lot of researchers have done some work on where weed seeds hide in combines and how combines spread seeds. We can figure out how to clean those areas in about 30 minutes. And what we're going to do is we're going to clean the combine head, we're going to clean out the feeder house and the rock trap. Moving further into the combine is beneficial for cleaning out fire hazards and that biomass that accumulates in the combine, but more than likely it does not contain a significant amount of weed seeds. So getting those weed seeds out of especially the feeder house and off the head are going to really prevent those weed seeds from migrating to the next field. Consider safety when we're doing this. We want to read, follow, and understand all the safety equipment for the combine and the cleaning equipment, but also wear a really good dust mask / respirator, eye protection, and ear protection.
Besides keeping your combine clean, there are other means of seed deposit that should be taken into account. Waterfowl are very common in Nebraska fields as winter and spring migrations take place. Waterfowl such as geese and ducks are notorious for aiding the spread of seeds from particularly problematic weeds. While little to nothing can be done about this particular means of seed scatter, it can be helpful to keep track of where these birds tend to congregate in your fields.
Right, so waterfowl are really good at moving seeds between fields and between farms. We can't do anything about it, but we can anticipate that. So there's been some research done showing how great they move Palmer amaranth and water hemp seed. So if we're having a lot of waterfowl land in our field, or if we farm near a lake or a creek, we can anticipate there being weed species being deposited there maybe every year. Just scout for those, look for those weeds emerging, and have a plan to control them.
As row crop producers seem to have higher and higher input costs every year when it comes to weed suppression tools, this particular strategy could help reduce the number of weeds in your fields, as well as contribute to the ever-growing concern of reduced efficacy with several weed control options such as glyphosate.
This is a small part of an integrated approach, so this contributes to our other weed control strategies. We're not going to eliminate every single weed seed on our farm with combine cleaning, but it can be a tool that we add to the toolbox that we're not going to see a resistant concern occur later down the road, and it's a 30-minute investment with very minimal investment in equipment. Our weed control tactics are getting more expensive every year. We want to just minimize the amount of weed seed that's germinating the next season and putting pressure on those tools.
As combines continue to roll through the fields this fall, it may be worth the extra time to keep your combine as clean as possible to ensure you're doing everything you can to reduce weed populations around your operation. Not only could this save you from reduced yields and higher input costs during the growing season, but could also help decrease the likelihood of resistance to more traditional means of weed suppression. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thank you for that story, Bill. If you'd like more information from Daniel on this topic, we've included an instructional video along with this story, which can be found on the Market Journal website. Well, that is going to do it for this week's show. If you happen to miss this story, be sure you follow Market Journal on YouTube as well as on social media to join in on the conversation. Until next time, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.